by means of a woman. I want to repeat that because it's important. God deliberately begins stirring Israelite courage by means of a woman. I think there's a couple of reasons why God does this. I think one reason God does this is to discourage machismo, to act against cultural stereotypes and worldly power structures that have certain connotations associated with courage that are almost exclusively identified with men. But God wants it very clear that courage is not a virtue unique to men, and neither is it to be associated with machismo. But I think also there's a subtle rebuke in the fact that God raised Deborah up to stir up courage in Israel. A rebuke here of a failure on the part of male leaders to take the initiative. The lack of male leadership in Israel could very well be one of the reasons why Deborah was raised up. Not only to stir this courage, but in a sense to rebuke the lack of volunteerism and the lack of spirit of courage in the men of Israel. And then she's identified as a mother in Israel. I find this phrase fascinating. It says, until you arose, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. Can you imagine a more fierce protector motivated by a deeper affection for those threatened than their mother? I have a friend who has a terrible fear of dogs, or at least he used to. He used to have a terrible fear of dogs. And it didn't matter the size of the dog. Chihuahua to German Shepherd, didn't matter. He was scared to death of dogs. Well, one time he took his family on a vacation out in the Smoky Mountains. And as they were driving along the windy roads, they saw this cute little cub bear. So he had to stop the car and get a picture, right? So he gets out and he gets his camera aligned, and this was before they were using cell phones to take pictures, right? So he's using a genuine camera here. And he was getting his camera ready. He's looking at the cub, getting it in the viewfinder, and all of a sudden the whole viewfinder went brown. And he looked up over his camera, and what did he see but a big, giant mama bear coming for him? He just barely got back in that car and closed the door before she went boom up against that car. When he got home, he said, Kevin, I tell you, that cured me of my fear of dogs. Once you've had an encounter with a protective mama bear, dogs are a mere nuisance. Mothers are fierce in their protection of their young, aren't they? And that's an image that is very appropriate to the song, because that was the spirit with which Deborah led in Israel. That was the spirit with which she stirred the courage of those in whom there was no courage. I want you to pay close attention to verse 8. When new gods were chosen, then war was in the gates. Was shield or spear to be seen among 40,000 in Israel? Verse 8 discloses the root of all of this trouble and of the need for this unconventional hero like Deborah. The reason for the absence of Israelite courage, it all stems from their attempt to find security in new gods. Their attempt to find security in anything other than Yahweh doomed them to fail. And not only did it doom them to fail, but it bled them of their courage. Any source of security that you rely on other than Yahweh is ultimately going to drain you of your courage. And that's what happened here. So you see, it is Yahweh who inspires heroism, not the Canaanite gods. And Israel had to learn that the hard way. It's Yahweh who inspires heroism, and not the things that we trust in, not the things that we rely on. Now, the third thing you'll notice as we move into the next section, beginning with verse 9 of this song, is God's unconventional army. So the unconventional starting point and the unconventional agents are now joined by God's unconventional army. Beginning in verse 9, it says, "My heart goes out to the commanders of Israel who offered themselves willingly among the people. Bless Yahweh." See, there it is again. Do you see that praise of God for the volunteerism of Israel? "Tell of it, you who ride on white donkeys, you who sit on rich carpets, and you who walk by the way. To the sound of musicians at the watering places, there they repeat the triumphs of Yahweh, the triumphs of his peasantry in Israel. The triumphs of who? The peasants, right? Not the dignitaries, not the kings, but the peasants. Then down to the gates march the people of Yahweh. Awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake, utter a song. Arise, Barak, lead away your captives, O son of Abinoam. Then down marched the remnant of the noble. The people of Yahweh marched down for him against the mighty. From Ephraim they set out into the valley, following you, Benjamin, with your kin. From Machir marched down the commanders, and from Zebulun arose who bare the martial staff. The chiefs of Issachar came with Deborah, and Issachar faithful to Barak. Into the valley they rushed out at his heels. Among the clans of Reuben there were great searchings of heart. Why did you tarry among the sheepfolds to hear the piping for the flocks? Among the clans of Reuben there were great searchings of heart. Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan, and Dan, why did he abide with the ships? Asher sat still at the coast of the sea, settling down by his landing. Zebulun is a people that scorn death. Naphtali too, on the heights of the field. Now let me explain what this stanza of the song is doing, because it may not be immediately obvious, but in verses 9 through 18 of this song, you have a description of the process of mustering an army for war. Now, it's important to understand that there is a particular ideal for warfare in Israel that is articulated in Deuteronomy chapter 20. And in that passage, God says that when a threat arises in Israel doesn't have to rely on a professional military. All they need to do is they simply need to form a voluntary militia. And the fact that it's voluntary is very clear by the fact that once all the young men of age are gathered, there's a process of elimination that they go through. They said, have any of you just built a house? And they, some of them raise their hand and say, okay, you're dismissed. Because it would be a shame if you had just finished that house and you die on the battlefield and you don't get to live in it. Since when is that a reason for an honorable discharge, right? Anybody just recently married? Okay, you're dismissed, they would say, right? And then finally they would say, hey, is there anybody here who's just afraid? See ya. You see what I'm saying? By the time that army was formed, by the time that process of elimination was done, you didn't have anybody in that army that didn't want to be there, right? It was a voluntary militia. No professional military in Israel. That was never supposed to happen. That's interesting, isn't it? It almost makes you think that Yahweh was trying to teach them not to trust in a military. But anyway, that was the ideal. An ad hoc volunteer militia would be assembled as needed when threats arose. Now this brings us back to the point we made earlier that the church is a volunteer organization. And the question that the book of Judges asks at this point is, how do you get people to volunteer for something as difficult as ministry? How do you get people to volunteer for something as demanding as ministry? Well, the Song of Deborah does it by means of grace and gratitude. Let me explain what I mean. There's a call to action that occurs in this song at this point, a call to action through memory of Yahweh's love, faithfulness, and power, expressed through the unlikely heroes and unconventional agents that he uses. Yahweh's righteous acts are identified in this song, and they are identified especially with the righteous acts of everyday, ordinary people. Look at verses 11 and 12 again. He says, to the sound of the musicians at the watering places, there they repeat the triumphs of Yahweh, the triumphs of his peasantry in Israel. Then down to the gates march the people of Yahweh. Do you hear that? It was the songs that people were singing at the watering holes where they were remembering Yahweh's salvations of the past by means of the simple, everyday people whom he raised up to meet the challenges of the day. It was those kinds of songs and it was those kinds of stories that inspired the people to come together for this new threat. Don't ever underestimate the power of our worship, church. It is the songs that we sing and the stories that we recount that inspires the volunteerism and the heroism and the courage that God is looking for to meet the new threats that are on the horizon. Isn't that right? It's those songs that we sing that shore up our courage and that remind us of God's faithfulness in the past, that inspires us to step up and say, here am I, send me. Right? We need songs like this. We need stories like this. We need to take advantage of the opportunity that we have here every Sunday to shore up our courage and to remember God's grace and to respond with gratitude. Because it is out of grace and gratitude that the spirit of volunteerism is born. Now, it's interesting. It's interesting to see what happens next. What happens next is a roll call. The tribes of Israel are called in turn, and each one is called out for either their participation or their non-participation in the battle. Verses 14 to 15a is a celebration of those who participated. But verses 15b and through verse 17 is a list of those who opted out. And Deborah is not shy about naming names. And verse 18 then celebrates those who distinguish themselves by risking their lives in the face of this threat. You know, Fred Craddock has a great preacher story, a great illustration based on the hymn that we're all familiar with, the hymn entitled, "When the Roll is Called Up Yonder." Y'all remember that hymn? When the trumpet of the Lord shall sound and time shall be no more, right? When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. Well, Fred Craddock's twist on that song is, yeah, but what about when the roll is called down here? When the roll is called down here, where will you be? When the roll is called down here, when there's messy work to be done, and the roll is called, will you be here? When there's a need for sacrifice in order to meet a need, here, down here, not up yonder, but down here, and the roll is called, will you be here? The question is not when the roll is called up yonder. The question is when the roll is called down here. Because whether or not you'll be there when the roll is called up yonder depends entirely on where you are when the roll is called down here. And in this song, the roll is called. And there were some who showed up, and there were some who didn't. That's the question you need to ask yourself this morning, church, is when the roll is called down here, where will you be? Will you be here? The song concludes with God's unconventional victory, verses 19 through 22. The proud Canaanite kings come to the battlefield expecting to face an ill-equipped and amateurish militia. Of course, when they look at the piddly little ragtag group that Israel has assembled to face them in battle, they no doubt smirked and thought, well, this won't take long. But when they got to the battlefield, what they encountered instead was Yahweh and all the forces of creation arrayed against them. They were thrown into a panic. Sisera fled, and this Israelite woman, Jael, delivers the decisive blow in the battle. Many scholars suggest that pitching tents was primarily women's work in ancient Israel. If that's true, then Jael applies her domestic skills to the military need, and Yahweh blesses such an unconventional approach to victory. I think a lesson is there. Never underestimate the heroism and impact of daily domestic duties. God blesses them and brings down mighty opponents by such simple acts of faithfulness as changing diapers and washing dishes and vacuuming carpets. See, this is not a song about superheroes, brothers and sisters. This is a song about forgotten heroes. Ordinary people who, by surrendering their lives to God, became vehicles of His power and salvation. When Carissa was younger, one of her favorite movies was The Pacifier, starring Van Diesel. The chorus of the theme song from that film echoes the sentiment of Deborah's song. I'm just your average, ordinary, everyday superhero. So what makes a hero? Well, according to the Song of Deborah, what makes a hero is someone who recognizes the true source of salvation. That makes a hero. According to the Song of Deborah, what makes a hero is a spirit of volunteerism motivated by faith in Yahweh's power to make a difference through ordinary people doing ordinary things. According to the Song of Deborah, what makes a hero is openness to Yahweh's unconventional ways of working in the world. Hey, if you're going to be part of what Yahweh is doing, then just prepare yourself now to be surprised. Because he will do it in ways you do not expect, and through people whom you do not expect. In other words, a hero looks an awful lot like Jesus, because Jesus is, after all, the ultimate unconventional hero. This unconventional and unexpected nature of Yahweh's deliverance was offered on this occasion and launches a trajectory, a whole series of unconventional and unexpected divine deliverances executed through unexpected and unlikely heroes, and that trajectory culminated in Jesus Christ. A hero whom no one anticipated. No one saw him coming. And certainly no one would have believed that by dying on a cross, he would accomplish so much. No one would have believed that by dying on a cross, he would have disarmed the principalities and powers and set us all free from their iron grip. See, that was a means of salvation that no one expected. Rising from the grave to eternal life, that was a feat that no one thought possible. So why such an unconventional salvation? Why does God always do this? Well, I think Paul answers this for us. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 21 through 29, listen to what he says. For since in God's wisdom the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided through the foolishness of our proclamation to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles, but to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. Consider your own call, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many of you were powerful. Not many of you were of noble birth. But God has chosen what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, things that are not, to reduce to nothing things that are, so that no one might boast in the presence of God. So how about you? When the roll is called down here, will you be here? Not when the roll is called up yonder. We're not there yet. Let's not worry about that yet, okay? Let's worry about when the roll is called down here. Let's worry about when the need is here. Let's worry about when the church is trying to pull together enough people in order to make a difference in this community, in this world. Will you be there? Will you be among those named in the songs that future generations sing about the heroes of the faith? Because that's the invitation of Deborah's song. The invitation of Deborah's song is for you to willingly offer yourself as a living sacrifice to God this morning in the manner of Jesus Christ, and to watch his power be unleashed in you in a way that will absolutely turn the world inside out. If you want to be a part of that, then we invite you to come while we stand and sing.
I care not today what the morrow may bring, if shadow or sunshine or rain. The Lord I know ruleth o'er everything, and all of my worry is vain. Living by faith in Jesus above, trusting, confiding in his great love. Our arms are safe in his sheltering arms. I'm living by faith and feel no alarm. I know that he safely will carry me through no matter what evils betide. Why should I then care though the tempest may blow, if Jesus walks close to my side? Living by faith in Jesus above, trusting, confiding in His great love. From all harm safe in His sheltering arm, I'm living by faith and feel no alarm.
Please be seated. You want to go?
All right, well, good morning. I hope you're excited. Just like the sermon mentioned, Vacation Bible School volunteers are still needed. I mean, we are, 7 hours away from the official kickoff tonight. So